Thank you. My name is Marla Lazarus, and I'm with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And we are very, very excited to have you today. Thank you so much for joining. This is our, Workshop Wednesdays webinar series. And this particular webinar is Federal Hiring 360. So everything you want to know about federal hiring, specifically for veterans and our military communities. So thank you all for joining today. Most importantly, thank you all for your service or your family service. It is greatly, greatly appreciated and is often under-recognized. So we definitely appreciate that. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So this webinar, as you just heard, is being recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel at the beginning of next month. So my colleague Sean Forbes, who's on the line and will also be presenting today, will post the link to that YouTube playlist in the chat room for you guys. But in addition to that, we will be sending a follow-up email with that link along with all of these slides that you will see today. So please don't feel like you have to feverishly write down everything you hear today. You will get a follow-up email with the slides probably tomorrow. And then if you have any questions, we will be utilizing the Q&A box for any questions today. So feel free to type any questions into the Q&A. Sean and I will be monitoring those as the presentation goes on. And we also have some guest speakers today who are CMS employees as well as veterans. So if you have any specific questions for any of our panelists or volunteers today, feel free to address those in the Q&A box as well. So getting right into our agenda, because we have a lot of information to go over today. So I am going to be breezing through some of the portions of today's content. We do want you to get everything, but we also want you to hear everything within hopefully about an hour. So again, my name is Marla Lazarus. I work in the Division of Global Hiring and Outreach. And just to give you a little bit of kind of overview of what we will be doing today, first, we're going to go over a very quick presentation on decoding, on CMS. So we have a quick CMS overview. We'll then be hopping right into federal resumes as well as the USA Jobs application process. The interviewing in a virtual world piece, we actually have a whole nother webinar on that. So we'll provide you the link for that. And then we'll finish off with building your brand through LinkedIn. So what is CMS? So for anybody joining today who may not be familiar with our agency, we are one agency under the Department of Health and Human Services, and we are responsible for the Medicare, Medicaid, Children's Health Insurance Program, and the Federal Health Insurance Exchanges. So the marketplaces created by the Affordable Care Act. Combined, all of our programs touch the lives of nearly 150 million people. And our mission is really to advance health equity, expand our coverage, as well as improve health outcomes overall. So with that said, we are headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland. We're one of the few federal agencies headquartered in Baltimore. We're right outside of Baltimore City in Baltimore County in a place called Woodlawn. And then we have 10 regional offices across the country as well, listed here on this slide, as well as an office, a satellite office in Puerto Rico. So who we hire, so we are a health policy organization first and foremost. So we definitely hire a lot of health policy, health administration, public policy, public administration type of folks. So what you'll see here is a listing of the more popular position titles, not necessarily all inclusive, but most of our more popular position titles that we hire for. But it's really just to show you that we hire kind of the gamut of everybody. So while we do hire a lot of health policy professionals or students and recent graduates, we also have a huge media and communications department. We have obviously a huge operational kind of regular business function that any organization is going to have. So we hire contract specialists, people with finance, accounting backgrounds, obviously HR professionals. And then we have a large STEM contingency as well. So a huge IT department, including cybersecurity. We hire actuaries, statisticians, economists, data scientists. And then our two most popular position titles in kind of the health policy arena are called the health insurance specialist and the social science research analyst position. So you'll see those a lot if you're looking on USA Jobs. So just wanted to point that out. So with that, again, that's just a very, very, very quick overview of CMS if you weren't familiar with our agency at all. But now we really want to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of our webinar today. So before I do that, we asked a few of our employees. They are all members of our Veterans Assistance Committee. So that is our employee resource group for veterans in our agency. So we asked a few of them to join us today just to kind of give a little background about their story, how they came to CMS, and a little bit about themselves and their careers. So first we have an Army veteran, Davina Davis. So take it away.
Hi. Thank you so much, Marla, for inviting me here, Marla and Sean, and hello to our veteran community. My name is Davina Davis. I am a 12-year Army veteran, and I have had an amazing journey in federal government in general. I started off in the Army as a 25 Bravo information assurance ass- information systems analyst, which essentially meant anything that plugged into an outlet, I was responsible for. You name it, phone, fax machine, computer, the gambit. And I really, really loved that mission. Um, it gave me so much experience, and it that experience allowed me to transition pretty easily. So the military takes us all over the world. My favorite duty station was with NATO in the Netherlands. And from there, I was recruited to be in the Army Network Warfare Battalion in Fort Meade for no such agency, which was great. I worked 24/7. I worked on a 24/7 ops floor. We were called the tip of the spear for technology until life happened. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I also came up for a deployment. My mom was given 1 year to live, and I was going to go on a 1 year deployment. So I chose my mom. It was an easy choice, right? And thank God for that choice, because of all the experience that I had, I was able to transition into a cybersecurity analyst with the DoD, which was awesome. That transition took about 5 months. Because of the experience that I had there, it was kind of easy to develop my resume specifically for that job. But being in the military for so long, I had no experience with resumes. So I had a lot of support from people on my team to help me put in like those buzzwords and advocate, for a really good position. I was a staff sergeant at the time. So staff sergeant pay transitioning to government pay, I kind of wanted the same thing. So those were a couple of bumps, but 5 months later, I was back doing that what we call sexy mission, and I was able to enjoy my mom. But through that year of her life, I became a patient advocate. um, Again, I was a techie, so these words of insurance and hospitalization, I was not familiar with at all. But I learned those words. I advocated for my mom for those words, and we had the best year of our lives together. Um, Fast forward a year and a half, I got married and had a child. And let me tell you, that 24 ops life was no longer for me. So I transitioned into management, and that made things a little easier. But tragedy happened again. My husband had an insane stroke. They gave him 1 to 3 days to live. I put back on my advocacy hat, and we got all the services that he needed. And I found myself doing that for other people. And as much as I love cybersecurity, patient advocacy was pulling at my heart. And I also wanted to move from Maryland to Georgia. So I quit my job. I went to school full time. Thank God for the GI Bill and that stipend. So I moved home to Georgia to be closer to my family to help with my husband and my son. I went to school full time. I got a degree in healthcare administration, and my degree required an internship. And so I went to the only place that I knew, USA Jobs, being, a government employee and a military veteran. And there was a program called Pathways. There's a pathway program for students to transition into federal service. And I was like, oh, this is wonderful. Not only do I get a job that pays, because a lot of internships were for free, um, I got paid through the job, and that semester GI Bill still paid for my school. And through the Pathways program, I was able to transition back into government service. So now I am a health insurance specialist. I work for DHPO, which is the Drug Health Plans and Programs Group. I manage ACA plans. I love that I have direct impact on my community. I speak with consumers all day. It's great to put back on my analyst hat because that was difficult to transition from cybersecurity to healthcare administration. I'm really thankful for LinkedIn. I found a group called Hire Heroes because a lot of that language in cybersecurity did not necessarily translate to healthcare insurance, but what did translate were my skills. And they were able to help me use those words and those verbiage of the things that I did to make it relatable to healthcare insurance. I absolutely adore CMS. The 2-year break was amazing. I got to find myself, really give back in a meaningful way, and to come back into a job that continues to let me do that was amazing. So that is my CMS story, my DoD government story. So thank you, Marla, again, and Sean, for having me.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm kind of glad that we don't get a kind of a preview of what your stories will be, because I love hearing it for the first time on the webinar. What an interesting background, and thank you so much again for your service. And it's funny that your story is going to touch on so much of what we're covering today in our content. So I think it's very, very relevant, and thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so moving on, like I said, we have a lot of information to get through. So I'm going to be breezing by some of this, but again, you'll get the slides in a follow-up email. So Davina talked about how Hire Heroes kind of helped her with her resume. So we're going to be talking about what is a federal resume, and then specifically in a few minutes, talk about how to translate military service to civilian speak, more or less. So a federal resume is really obviously your application. It's really a marketing tool for yourself, right? So it's the first thing managers see. So it's their first interaction with you, really. So you want to make sure it's as professionally presented as possible, right? So some people consider it even a paper interview. So how does that differ from maybe a private industry resume? So here's just a kind of a compare and contrast chart here. So I'm not going to read it all, but basically, generally speaking, what people are taught a lot of times is to keep their resumes short. Private industry companies like short, maybe 1 or 2 page resumes. They don't like to see a lot of length or too much information in their resumes. That's a little different from federal resumes. So if you're looking for a civilian employment, you want to have a resume that's robust enough to compete with everybody else that you're applying against. So this is not a hard and fast rule, but what we typically say 3 to 5, 3 to 6 pages is perfectly acceptable. But what that is really implying is not to cut your resume to short, to 1 or 2 pages, if you have the experience to support it. So some folks might not have that experience, but I would assume that most on the line are either veterans, transitioning service members, or potentially military spouses or family members of service members. So a lot of times probably the people on the line will have some significant experience to include in your resume. So don't cut that short. The format itself, there's no prescribed right or wrong for federal resumes, right? So we will go over what we call a recommended format, but it is in no way required. And we're not suggesting you to take your resume and spend a whole month and reformatting it if you're satisfied with the way your resume reads. But it is for folks who may want to revamp their resume or maybe starting from scratch. Some people in the military, I have heard, don't have great resumes for federal employment because of the way military promotions work. So in that case, some military professionals that are just about to transition are semi-starting from scratch, at least as it refers to federal resumes. So that being said, we will go over that in a few minutes, so I'll skip the format portion. Just want to point out that keywords in and of themselves are not being scanned by any software. So no software is looking for specific keywords and screening people out that way. So that's just a common myth that I wanted to debunk. And that a human resource professional in a federal HR agency is going to be looking at your resume. So it is not just a system review. And then submission, most of our jobs are recruited through USA Jobs, as Davina mentioned. So that's where all federal agencies are required to post their positions. There are some exceptions to that. Some of those exceptions include some of our veteran special hiring authorities, which we'll cover. But just wanted to point out that for the most part, usajobs.gov is where you will find federal positions. So that being said, I want to point out that federal resumes is not really a one size fits all. So it is, it does behoove you to have a few versions of your resume, especially if you have some varied experience. And I know with military careers, some people can have, experience in different sectors. So especially if that's the case, then I would encourage you to have a few versions of your resume highlighting the different experience that you have, maybe in a more bold way, depending on the position that you're applying to. So if you have, let's say, IT experience, let's use Davina as an example, IT experience and kind of healthcare experience, right? If you're applying to IT positions, then you might want to have a resume that is more IT forward. So highlights your IT experience a little more. But if you're applying to a health policy position, then you might want to have another version of your resume that highlights that field more. So in general, though, your resume should communicate your qualifications, show that you have provided immediate results, and obviously convey your first and best impression. Some things that are consistent throughout that any resume should have is consistency in formatting, and it should be easy to read. And so we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. As I mentioned, this slide just really talks about the targeted resume. So having a few versions of that resume could really work to your favor, depending on the position you're applying to. Some people choose to have a summary of qualifications. Some managers do prefer that. I will say, though, that in any organization, including CMS, resumes are a very subjective document. So some managers are going to prefer one format. Some managers are going to prefer a completely different format. So as I mentioned, there is no right or wrong format. But again, this is just part of the formatting piece of it, the summary of qualifications. Some managers do like to see a quick summary. So just make sure that's concise and relevant to whatever position you're applying to. So I mentioned this recommended, not required format, which we call the outline format. And so basically the gist of this is that you take your experience and or skill sets really and separate them out into different headers. So we use in this particular example, the headers you see are operations management, project management, supply management, and so forth. So basically you take the header, the skill set that you want to highlight, put it in all caps, and then a very short paragraph after the fact to describe what you did as it relates to that skill set in that particular experience. So that would be repeated out for any experience that you're listing. What you'll also see at the very bottom, it's a little cut off at the bottom of the page, is where it says key accomplishments. And in this particular example, they separate out their accomplishments from their actual functions. And that allows your accomplishments to really stand out. And again, using small paragraphs instead of big block narratives, it's just more appealing to the eye. So we as HR professionals have seen pretty much everything you can think of when it comes to resumes. And we have seen like full page, just all text, right? So one big paragraph, there's nothing to separate it. There's nothing to draw your eyes to. And as a manager, if you're reading, if you're getting 100 resumes for one position and you're trying to get through those 100 resumes, a resume that looks like that is very daunting and sometimes can be set to the side. And I'll come back to that one later because it's so hard to read. So just a point of why we recommend this format. So some important things to note in federal resumes is you definitely want to include the month and year for each experience. So a lot of our positions require at least 1 year of full-time experience to qualify for a specific grade level. And an HR specialist is not going to know if you qualify for that if you just use the year. If you just say 2019 to 2020, they don't know whether that was December 2019 to February 2020 or more than a full year. So definitely want to do that, as well as the hours per week. You also want to separate each experience, including those in the same position, but possibly a different level, because that shows work progression, especially in the military. When you might have promotions, but you're in the same field, you definitely want to separate those out, the different ranks, as different experiences in your resume. And then we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but if you're qualifying on experience as opposed to education, you definitely want to take note of the specialized experience that's listed in the vacancy announcement and make sure to include that in your resume. We'll go over that in more detail in a few minutes. So kind of to Davina's point, language matters. So now we're going to kind of transition into the military speak versus civilian speak. So you want to make sure that your resume translates to the hiring managers that's reading it. So the first thing is translating your careers. So actually the state of Maryland has an amazing website. The link is listed here as well. Again, just want to remind you that you will get these slides after the fact, and anybody that registered for this webinar will get the slides. But this military to federal jobs crosswalk basically allows you to select your MOS or your military occupational code or your occupational title. So you can select either one. And based on that, it gives you a list of suggested federal civilian position titles that you could be interested in. So, right, so we took the Health Services Management MOS, and you can see, right, the first thing is the Health Insurance Administration series. That's our health insurance specialist position that I talked about earlier. And the code is a 107. The GS code is a 107 for that. And so that it just kind of shows you what you've done and what you might qualify for in civilian employment. So now we'll talk about, so that's the career itself, but really translating your skill sets is most important for your resume. So the first thing you want to do is demilitarize your resume, right? So you really want to take the inventory of skills as opposed to the inventory of your functions. So you want to differentiate what you might have done from the skill sets and experiences that you gained from what you've done. I'm saying this assuming that what you have done may not exactly relate to a civilian career that you're seeking, but there's some that are. So if you have, if you came from the cybersecurity field in the military and you're looking for a cybersecurity position in the, as a civilian, they might really correlate directly. So this particular section, you may not have to worry about as much. But there are certainly positions in the military that the functions might not relate directly, but you can pull out those skill sets. So that's what we're going to talk about for a few minutes. So for example, just in this particular example, a sharpshooter, right? So that's the function. The person was a sharpshooter, but they would have led small teams to carry out high priority objectives with minimal room for failure in high pressure situations, right? So taking out the skill sets that they would have gained, leadership, ability to carry out work with minimal supervision, attention to detail is obviously huge. Ability to work under strict deadlines and a lot of pressure, right? So that's just a very brief example of how you can start to pull out the skill sets that might be attractive to managers and not so much focusing on the function of what you did. Again, if that doesn't directly correlate to what you're seeking. And some other ways to think about pulling these out is looking at the different skill sets or the full picture. So one is technical skills. Obviously, that could be a apples to apples comparison. If you have those technical skills in a particular area that you're seeking employment in. But interpersonal skills is also very important in any organization, right? So working with a variety of personalities, a variety of different ranking officials, right? So if the position you're applying to in the civilian government is going to be briefing up to senior leadership in any administration or in any agency, then the fact that you've had to work with high-ranking officers in the military could be very relevant. Again, leadership skills. So did you supervise any subordinates in the military? So that obviously can translate those leadership skills into civilian employment. As I mentioned, just a note here at the bottom left to separate out your experience by rank and duties within your resume. So don't group, 20 years of experience together in one particular, bullet or part of your resume. Make sure you separate that out into your kind of progressive responsibilities. So this is just taken, again, just another example to show you exactly kind of how to pull out what would be necessary and how to translate those skill sets. So we're talking about an infantryman trying to translate that into logistics management for the federal government. So an infantryman with 23 years in the military, operating tanks, weapons, and they dug digits. So how do you market that to civilian employers, right? So you supervised, you trained, you evaluated personnel, supported more than 2,000 troops. This is, again, just an example. You had an inventory list of 1,500 items. You managed assets, totaling $65 million, right? So all of these things are super important to a logistics management professional in the civilian field, in the civilian world. So just pulling that kind of out of what you did. Again, the functional areas, so personnel management, logistics and operations, and later in their career, maybe they demonstrated some strategic planning or analysis. And then again, possible employment opportunities. So based on this experience, this person could market their skills as a logistics expert, possibly like management analyst or program analyst type positions. So again, just showing you how to take it from where you came from to where you want to go and how to best put that forth on your resume. And then a few kind of general do's and don'ts that applies to any resume. You want to definitely quantify whenever possible. So managing a budget as opposed to managing a $65 million budget means a lot. It could be very different to a hiring manager looking at that. So make sure you quantify whenever possible. Obviously, you want to make sure it's error-free. You want to make sure you have several pairs of eyes on your resume. Again, we already talked about tailoring your resume and making it timely and complete, meaning the submission of your resume must be timely and complete based on the vacancy announcement you're applying to. Some of the don'ts, obviously, you never want to embellish or lie on your resume. That kind of goes without saying. You don't want to put personal information. So pictures, age, date of birth, ethnicity, marital status, none of that should be going on your resume. And then again, kind of the same thing, using one resume for everything may not be beneficial depending on your background. So I know I breezed through that information. Just want to take a quick break from resumes while we go into our next CMS story. And that is from Thomas Shankweiler, who is an Air Force veteran. So Tom, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Marla. And welcome to all the veterans in today's workshop. It's great to have you here. Hopefully you'll find a lot of value out of today's session. As Marla said, my name is Tom Shankweiler. I served in the Air Force from 1987 to 1996 as an air traffic controller. We were one of the few groups that got to work directly with the pilots as they were carrying out their mission, and so it was a real privilege. So as I sat on one side of the microphone, I quickly developed an interest in the other side of the microphone. And so I used a lot of my GI Bill to pursue a general associate's degree, but I also went forward and picked up some flying time. I was able to get my instrument license and was pursuing my commercial license before I moved to Maryland. And when I got out of the military in 1996, I had this full aviation background. I was thought I was going to go in and stay in kind of that sector. But at that time, there was also some things going on in terms of ITs and computers that also kind of sparked my interest. And so coming out of the Gulf War, I had decided I was going to move to Maryland with my family that I just recently started. And so it was kind of those life change events. Didn't want to go back into a wartime situation. So I moved into the Maryland area. And when I got here, I started looking at aviation type stuff. And I found myself really being drawn more to the IT side. And so I went forward and picked up a degree, a certificate degree through Microsoft as a Microsoft certified engineer, took a bunch of Cisco classes, and really kind of came in on the ground floor of where the computers were being networked together in very significant ways, and data was being exchanged. It just really caught my eye. So I had to go through this transition, not of just coming out of the military, but I had to try to rewrite myself or recreate myself, if you will, on paper to be attractive to a new industry, a new type of sector. And so I spent some time in the private sector and serving those folks for about 6 or 7 years. And then I found myself doing some work with National Guard down in the southern DC area. And then I was able to get some work up at HHS, the Health and Human Services side of the house, and kind of moved into the basics of cybersecurity, started running some small teams, accomplishing some specific projects and product rollouts. And through all of that, I found myself kind of diverging once again from being the doer in IT to leading teams, and found myself also being pulled towards a management track. And so after a few years of doing things, I was invited in to apply for some jobs at Health and Human Services to support the Chief Information Security Officer there at HHS. And so I applied for that, and through a rigorous process, I was able to get selected. And I got to do that for a couple of years. And then I was recruited to come over to, was still HHS at the time, which converted to the CMS in this particular opportunity. It was with the healthcare.gov or Obamacare, whichever term you like to use, but the marketplace was emerging, and I was asked to kind of come in and really think through a lot of the security architecture and the things that would be needed to make that whole system a go in just a couple of years, and how we're going to deliver that as a service in just a few short years, 2 to 3. And during that time, all of the marketplace stuff started with HHS and then migrated over to CMS. And so that's how I ended up over here. And did that for a few years, about 4 in total. Left just before the open enrollment for option year 4, and was recruited into the CISO's office directly for CMS, and was asked to try to bring a lot of the program that we had built under Marketplace and really kind of build that out enterprise-wide for CMS, because they saw that we were doing a lot of really interesting things in the cloud. We were kind of on the bleeding edge, if you will, actually creating new policies, just doing some really interesting work. And so I accepted that position. And since then, I've been the director of cyber operations for CMS in the CISO's office. I've had an opportunity to really expand my ability to lead, been able to really shape how CMS's cybersecurity program was built, launched, operates, evolves. And it's not just me, but it's the entire team. And so that was really, really exciting to be able to be part of that work. As we were going through that, I learned a lot more about direct hire authorities with the veterans, and we've brought some people in through the direct hire program. We've had some veterans that had some direct hire specialties or special programs. I brought somebody in who was also an Air Force reservist who was a plane mechanic, brought him in, and we ended up kind of having him cross-train into penetration testing field. Well, he absolutely loved it. Had built a program around that for about 3 years. And then he was then recruited away to go serve at another agency to help them build their program. So really just interesting kinds of work. And the thing I would probably pass on to you all is, there's some things that you can really think about as you're beginning to apply. One is really what is your interests and kind of where are you at in life? How do your interests align to different agency missions? And maybe really kind of thinking about that, because once you can get excited about about the mission of an agency, it's easy to see yourself working there. After that, alignment is really getting the application and the opportunity to work there. And then it's about engagement, just really getting in, engaging, not just in your work, but understanding and engaging in the mission itself, right? And through that, you'll continue to grow. You'll meet people and you'll grow into that particular field. And if it's not an exact fit, a lot of times you can find ways to pivot just a little bit and do something that is in alignment with where you want to go. And there'll be people there to help you along that way. And then there's times that you just want to make a full shift, right? Davina talked about that a couple of times. She was heading in this direction and made a pretty significant pivot, but she brought all her skills and capabilities with her. And I did the same thing. And I'm sure that you will have the opportunity to do that as well. So the last thing I just wanted to share with you is something I'm really excited about is we built a cyber veterans program to train up veterans in cybersecurity. And so we bring in 3 people every quarter and take them through a very rigorous program. And so, in each quarter, we actually have 9 people going, but they all start their journey 1 quarter at a time and 3 at a time. So that has just been a phenomenal program to help transition people from various skill sets into cybersecurity, which is a much needed field, and help in our mission is really to protect the CMS programs and ensure that the payers get, that our, the consumers, the people that are on Medicare and Medicaid are getting paid and have easy access to their services, that their information stays secure. So that's a lot about our mission. So with that, Marla, I think that's a pretty good summary. Hopefully some good tips for the veterans here, and I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. And I didn't realize that you came to us during the implementation of the marketplaces. So I'm sure that's a very exciting time in your career, to say the least.
That was amazing. Yeah, probably one of the best times ever.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And again, thank you for your service. We definitely appreciate you sharing your story. And I think it's helpful to hear from just kind of different perspectives across the agency and how people came to CMS. So thanks again.
Yep.
Okay, so moving on, we're going to get into the ins and outs of the USA Jobs application process. So again, I am going to fly through this information. There will be a follow-up, a resource box email at the end, along with mine and Sean's personal email address. So feel free to take note of that. If you do have any follow-up questions after the fact, we are happy to assist you. Again, you can also use the Q&A box in the webinar today if you have any questions. So the hiring paths within the federal government, there's 2 main hiring paths. So competitive versus non-competitive. We think about competitive in layman's terms as applying through USA Jobs, getting rated and ranked against other candidates. And non-competitive, again, just in layman's terms, being considered potentially outside of the USA Jobs applications process. Maybe you have to contact individual agencies for their application procedures. Maybe it's listed on the USA Jobs vacancy announcement. But we'll get into more detail on that, on how CMS runs our programs. So there's some special hiring authorities for veterans that I did want to point out today. 3 listed here. One is the Veterans Recruitment Appointment. Eligible veterans can be hired at any grade level up into including the GS-11. So there's a limit. We cannot bring you in above the GS-11, but that does not prevent promotions after you are brought in. And that is for some of the eligibility requirements, although I'm not going to be all inclusive here, is disabled veterans, recently separated veterans within the last 3 years, and veterans that have earned certain campaign badges or medals during wartime. So that's some of the eligibility. I'll present some links for you for more information on full eligibility requirements. The 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authority is pretty self-explanatory. So if you have a 30% or more service-connected disability, then you would be eligible for this hiring authority. And it allows federal agencies to hire you without necessarily having to go through the USA Jobs application process at any grade level for which a candidate is eligible for, or for which they qualify for. And then the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act allows eligible veterans to apply to and compete for positions that would typically only be open to federal employees, to civilian federal employees. So it allows eligible veterans to apply to positions where on the vacancy announcement, it might say only open to current federal employees. Some of our other special hiring authority includes our military spouse hiring authority, and it allows eligible military spouses, again, the same as the VEOA, to apply for and compete positions that would typically only be open to current federal employees. And then, too far. And then just to kind of recap what Tom was talking about. So our CMS Cyber Vets program is a 6-month training opportunity, and we utilize the Skill Bridge program to onboard those folks. So the Department of Defense's Skill Bridge program allows transitioning veterans. So transitioning service members. So service members who are in their final stages of their career and are preparing for transition, the Skill Bridge program allows them to train with other organizations, sometimes federal agencies. And so we have a partnership with them where we bring in those service members for a 6-month program. So more information on that, again, you can email myself directly, or you can email our recruitment resource box. Again, that information will be on our last slide today. And then lastly, we have, as Davina mentioned, pathways programs for students and recent graduates. We have an internship program for current students. That is our paid program. The recent graduates program is for individuals who have who have graduated within the past 2 years. And that can be extended up to 6 years for certain eligible veterans if your military service prevented you from applying during your eligibility period. And then the Presidential Management Fellows Program is for advanced degree candidates or above, so master's or above, and it is a 2-year leadership development program. So just wanted to go over some of our special hiring authorities, but what you really want to know and figure out, if you don't already know, is if you get veterans preference. So unfortunately, not all people who have served in the military get veterans preference, but those that do can have a leg up in the federal application process. So you definitely want to know your rights. So just a very, very brief description. There's what we call 5-point and 10-point preferences. That played a bigger role when there used to be a different rating system within the federal government, and adding 5 or 10 points could greatly affect your chances when we had what was called the rule of 3 and the top 3 people were referred. Nowadays, the difference mainly is how you are given that preference, and in essence also referred out. So I'm not going to read through all of the eligibility requirements, but you can see here there's a bunch of eligibility requirements to get 5 points. 10 points is if you have a service-connected disability or have received a Purple Heart. So if you're still not sure, if you're starting to look at federal employment and you just aren't sure if you get veterans preference, and if so, what preference you get, the Department of Labor has a really great tool called the Veterans Preference Advisor. So if you visit this website that's at the bottom of the slide, it will take you to a page that looks like this screenshot, and it will take you through a set of questions that you can answer. And based on your answers to those questions, it will tell you likely what veterans preference you get. So a really good resource for those who may not be as familiar. So getting into the search on USA Jobs. So this will be the homepage that you see when you go to USA Jobs. My assumption is that most of our audience today is at least somewhat familiar, but just want to bring everybody up to the same level if you haven't been searching on USA Jobs for federal positions. The big red arrow you'll see here is to an icon that says make your resume searchable. That's been a growing kind of feature on USA Jobs over the last few years. So making your resume searchable allows federal agencies to source for potential applicants for positions that they may have coming up. So if your resume is not searchable, if that's not noted on your profile, then you won't come up in those searches. So you definitely want to make your resume searchable. So taking it again a step back. So you want to go to USA Jobs, you have to create a profile for yourself. You can create or store up to 5 resumes. So that's really where the targeted resumes we talked about earlier comes in. So if you have resumes that are kind of focused on different areas, you can create or store up to 5 of them. And then you can also upload up to 10 attachments. So these attachments would be like your DD-214, your VA disability letter, if applicable. So any kind of supporting documentation to your application. And most importantly, to any special hiring authorities that you might want to be considered for, you have to make sure you include the necessary documents. Those, by the way, will all be spelled out on every vacancy announcement, the required documents. And some other information to take note of in your profile information. When you're filling out your profile, there will be questions about your military service. So you'll have that question, you'll have a veterans preference question, and then the federal employee question. Obviously, you don't want to select that you are or have been a federal employee unless you've held civilian federal employment. So some of the search features. So the main use of USA Jobs is going, creating an account for yourself, and then searching for open positions and being able to apply directly from there. So on that search, you can use one of probably a dozen or so different filters. So the first one is a keyword or location search. So you can just search for a keyword, all the open positions that kind of match your criteria will come up. Depending on what you use, that could still result in thousands of positions. So if you really want to narrow it down a little farther, you use the different filters by hiring path, which we'll get into in a little bit. You can filter by salary, by department or agency, the job series, which is basically the occupational title. Excuse me. So any of those filters you can use to kind of narrow down your search results. Obviously, location will be one as well. And then at the bottom of the slide, just want to point out that whatever search results you use, if it gives you positions that you're really interested in and it's a good search for you, I encourage you to save that search. And then you can be notified when any position is posted that meets the criteria that you set for that saved search. So you don't always have to go back in. They can start sending you emails for positions that meet your criteria. Excuse me one second. Excuse me. So I talked about hiring paths. So this is a really good tool to use. They've implemented this in the last few years on USA Jobs. And it's really a way to determine who that position is open to and whether you would be eligible to apply to it. So you'll see here in the upper left, open to the public. Obviously, that's going to be open to the general public. But the very one underneath that is veterans. So you definitely want to select that one so you can see what positions are open specifically to veterans, as well as what positions are also open to veterans, which may not be open to the general public. So I mentioned some of those special hiring authorities before. The same for military spouses. So that is a separate hiring path as well. And also on the front page, you'll see an events section on USA Jobs. So this is just pointing out that you can find some really useful kind of informational sessions. We promote all of our webinars on USA Jobs, so definitely want to keep an eye out for the events for anything relevant to kind of what you may be looking to learn. So breaking down the anatomy of a vacancy announcement, I am going to speed it up here. So again, the hiring path is going to be listed on the right-hand side. So this is a screenshot of what you will see when you open. So now you've done your search, you have the positions that meet your criteria that came up. And the position title of every position will be a hyperlink. Once you click on that, it'll come up to the details of the vacancy announcement. On the right-hand side, you can very clearly see who this position is open to. For instance, this one you can see is open to military spouses and veterans. The next section you'll come to as you scroll down on the vacancy announcement is the duty section, and you'll see a responsibility section. That won't necessarily give you any qualification requirements, but it is a good section to help you determine whether that job is the right fit for you. So what that job will be what that person will be doing day to day is a good way to tell whether you'll be interested in that type of work. Caveat to say, when sometimes CMS posts announcements that are open to the agency, and any hiring manager can access that list. In those cases, especially through our Pathways programs, in those cases, the responsibility section won't be as specific to any particular job because it could be going into any one of our hiring departments. So just want to take note of that when you're looking at the responsibility section. So the most important section you come to is going to be the qualifications, going to say requirements, and then a qualification section. So this is what you really want to pay attention to. In any vacancy announcement, you will see what we call specialized experience. And that is for example, in this first paragraph, you'll see in order to qualify for the GS-11, you must meet the following and demonstrate at least 1 year of qualifying experience equivalent to the next lower grade level in the federal government. But you can obtain this in the private sector or obviously your military service as well. So it's going to give you listed literally by numbers exactly what you need to in skill sets or experience that you need to qualify for that position, i.e. also needs to be reflected in your resume, right? So this particular vacancy announcement says applying quantitative methods to analyze the effectiveness of a public healthcare program, preparing reports and responses applicable to healthcare, so on and so forth. So whatever it says for the position you're applying to, you need to make sure that it is reflected in your resume somewhere if you have in fact done that and have that experience. HR specialists will not assume anything, so it all has to be spelled out in your resume. The second paragraph is just to point out the fact that some of our positions, especially at the more entry-level grades, you can substitute education for experience. So if you don't have that experience, but you have, let's say, a bachelor's degree with a 3.0 or a master's degree, you could potentially qualify for the position on education alone. And then the third paragraph is saying an HR specialist can combine education and experience if maybe you don't have to the fullest extent one or the other, but you can combine the two to make you qualified for the position. Again, it will all be spelled out in the vacancy. So just to recap, the qualifications from the vacancy must be reflected in your resume somewhere. Your resumes should be amended again slightly depending on the qualifications required for each stated vacancy. And then again, just want to reiterate, HR will not make assumptions about any of your qualifications. So they won't say, well, you were an inventory specialist, so you must have done this type of work. If it's not reflected in your resume, they cannot use it as qualifying experience. So you must amend your resume to include any specialized experience required. And then last but not least, the assessment portion, right? So your resume is one part of your application, but there will always be an assessment portion on USA Jobs as well. And that typically, bottom right, you'll see where it has the link to an occupational questionnaire. Most of our positions still have these occupational questionnaires, and it is basically multiple choice questions about your background, your skill set, your experience, everything. It'll ask you, I have experience in analyzing policy, just throwing that out there. Everything from I do not possess this experience to I'm an expert at this, and then everything in between. So you have to choose, so you can preview that before you actually hit the apply button. But if you see something that looks like the top left of the screen, where you will be assessed on the following, and it gives a varying set of skill sets here or experiences, then it is a slightly more involved assessment that you will have to go through online. It is a assessment that you can come back to, but it requires a lot more time than, let's say, the multiple choice one. So keep an eye out for that. Excuse me. And just recap here. Excuse me 1 second. Always on the last slide before I stop talking, the coughing hits. So just to recap, you definitely want to invest the time that you need to analyze and really read each vacancy announcement well, and then create a resume that targets that experience that you have based on the position you're applying to. So with that, I will, I have one more slide. So we talked about how different agencies kind of administer our special hiring authority slightly differently. So all of our positions are going to be posted in USA Jobs. This is the link you'll see here to CMS positions. And if you are eligible for the 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authority, if you are a military spouse, there are provisions in our vacancy announcements for you to email your resume and all your supporting documentation to the HR specialist listed at the bottom of the vacancy announcement. And you can be considered non-competitively follow those procedures. So with that, these are just some veteran resources for you I mentioned earlier. So that will be, again, in the follow-up email that you received these slides in. So with that, sorry, I keep thinking it's the last slide. As I mentioned, the Interviewing in a Virtual World is an entire webinar that we previously recorded. So I just wanted to give everybody the link to that webinar. That is the last slide before our next testimony. So with that, I will introduce Deborah Carambellas, and she is a Army veteran. So Deborah, take it away.
Thank you. I know our time is getting short, so I'll cut down my hour presentation just to a couple of minutes. Just kidding. But again, everyone, my name is Deborah Carambellas, and Marla and Sean, thank you so much for letting me be part of this. I really wish that I had got to see this many years ago and joining the federal government. This is awesome. And so definitely to all our veterans and folks on the call, take heed of all these wonderful resources. A little bit about my background. I just recently celebrated 10 years as a federal employee. I had 8 years with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I've spent the last 2 with CMS. So I am part of the Office of Human Capital, and we are responsible for the hiring and training of individuals. And it has been an amazing experience to be part of CMS. I mean, this is an agency that, 149 million people that we service and help. That's like 1 out of every 3 Americans that we touch their lives. So I'm actually part in CMS of facilitating the new employee orientation. So I get to meet all the new employees coming on board. And it has been such a wonderful experience to actually be part of CMS. So I'm a talent development specialist, a fancy term for really a training specialist. And I have a master's of education, thank you, U.S. Army, and a master's of emergency preparedness that I've gotten to use in a couple of different ways. But prior to joining the government, I spent 34 years in the U.S. Army. So you could do some quick addition there and see, my age there. But, maybe I joined when I was like 12. I'm not so sure. But yeah, so since I was 17 years old, I've known nothing really but of the U.S. Army. So when I joined, so I retired in 2011 as an Army First Sergeant. And I spent basically the first part of my military experience in military intelligence. My MOS, I was a 98J, which is electronic intelligence systems. And then the last 24 years, and don't cut me off when you hear this right away, but I was in the recruiting command for the last 24 years. So all those veterans on the call are like, I'm sure you remember your recruiter very fondly. And yes, I was part of that. But I can tell you, when I got out of the military, other than, when I was 17, okay, I worked at Burger King. I was a Whopper hopper way back when. But then I joined the military. And upon getting out of the military, I knew I definitely wanted to work for the government. And just trying to think about negotiating that was very worrisome. I mean, just to think about a couple of things. So navigating USA jobs, converting what skills I did in the recruiting command and the military over, interviewing. I mean, I'd sat on promotion boards and interviewed for some other programs within the military, but actually sitting there and interviewing for a job, made me really, really nervous to think about that. And then putting a resume together. I had a biographical summary when I was in the military, but never a really nice polished resume. So a couple of things that I did when I got out, USA Jobs, I definitely utilized friends to help me kind of navigate. It's definitely in 10 years, it's definitely the process has become a lot more smoother to navigate. But at the very beginning, it was kind of hard. So a lot of friends helped me out. I asked for help out there. Converting your skills, I use the online resources, and I got some wonderful books written that all about converting your military skills into civilian skills, and a lot of examples of resumes and how they could look. And so I used that really to put together some of my information for a resume. for the interview process, and now it's a lot different. So rather than a panel interview or in person, it's a virtual presence. So you have to make sure you're really savvy with that Zoom, and you can go up and sell yourself while you're on camera. There's a lot to that. There's a lot of great information out there on Google on how to put your best foot forward in interviewing, but the key is well prepared and being well rehearsed. And resume, I did use a professional service to do a resume, but that's not really necessarily recommended. I think there's some great helpful hints in this presentation and really putting that together. But I was a little nervous and making sure it was government speak, because again, 34 years, all I really knew was the military. So that professional resume got me started. And from here on out, from VA to CMS, using, my own knowledge of what I knew about resumes to apply for CMS. So I have had just a wonderful, wonderful experience working here. And I know a lot of you are out there and thinking about coming in, and it does make you nervous, the things that you're going to have to negotiate. But never forget the great skills that you have serving in the military that you take for granted for any rank that you are. Your leadership skills, your professionalism, your integrity, your honesty, your trustworthiness, all of those types of things, your dedication to mission achievement, they can be parlayed into a great language that government supervisors appreciate. Even though I was a little bit older getting out of the military and joining the government, that was okay, because the government appreciated the experience that I brought forth and all of those skills that you don't really think about, but they know that military veterans possess. So I just want you to, I want you to really think about that. There are so many wonderful things and so many skills that you earned in the military that can be translated. And that's really all that I have. I just want to wish you all the best of luck in your endeavors, and just research these things to come on board. So thank you, Marla.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Again, love to hear the different perspectives and how, you really took the time to learn about and research how to really transition into the civilian sector. So appreciate that perspective. Okay, so moving on to our last topic, and thanks for hanging in there with us. I know we're a little over today, but like I said, it was a lot of information, and I think this last section is really, really, really going to be helpful to you. I think we all know we're kind of moving into this new world, or have moved into this new world of kind of social media, and especially as it relates to recruitment. So my colleague Sean Forbes is going to take this last section. He is also a Navy veteran and a social media guru. So he's going to teach you all about how to build your brand through LinkedIn. So Sean?
Thanks, Marla. And I think social media guru is just a fancy word for I spend entirely too much time on social media. But I'm gonna walk you through LinkedIn today. We'll talk about your profile and why LinkedIn is important. Marla, if I can get you to stop sharing, and then I'll share my slides that I have. Thank you. Let's see. And share, hopefully this works smoothly. All right, Marla, can you see my screen?
Sure can.
Perfect, thanks. So, let's see, that is not working. Oh, there we go. So as Marla mentioned, my name is Sean Forbes. I'm a recruiter with the Division of Global Hiring and Outreach for CMS. I'm also a 20-year Navy veteran, and I've been in recruitment and social media since about 2009. So I'd like to take some of my experience and hopefully relay that to you. And one of those things, and I think Marla talked about it earlier, is for resumes, there's no one size shoe fits all. And for your job search, it's kind of the same thing. You need to use multiple tools when looking for a position or a job. So one of those should definitely be LinkedIn. So why LinkedIn? When I was active duty, I didn't really have a need for LinkedIn, but as I, slowly started getting to separating and then retiring, I realized how important LinkedIn of a tool actually is. So, before you separate, or if you already have, it's never too late. Just make sure LinkedIn is part of, your job search toolkit. But why LinkedIn? So a couple of things. So networking, job search, and recruiting, I would say, are the big things or the big reasons why you should be using LinkedIn. A study found about 122 million people received an interview through LinkedIn, and about 35 million have been hired through a person they connected with on the site. So the networking is a huge factor of LinkedIn, and it has extraordinary reach, for reaching out through your network. So networking, as I said, there's about 175 million registered users in the US. So make sure you network. Chances are somebody knows somebody that is in the industry you're looking to get into or make a career transition into. You can make those contacts within LinkedIn. We'll talk a little bit about it later, but groups are also a big part of the networking. If you can join a veteran group or an active duty group, you can network through there, and that'll just ultimately help your job search. So speaking of jobs, LinkedIn is a great resource for that. There's over 50,000 remote jobs available right now in the US. 40 million people use LinkedIn to search for jobs every day. And the last stat I saw, about 3 people are hired every minute on LinkedIn. Excuse me. So definitely make sure you're using LinkedIn for, by searching for jobs. I know all the federal jobs and all the jobs that we post, it's CMS, will be on USA Jobs, but we're, as recruiters, we obviously want you to come work for CMS, but we also just want to help you find jobs or a new career. So, using LinkedIn to find positions is a great way to go for it. And I will add that most federal agencies do post on LinkedIn as well. And then lastly, for recruiting, about 20,000 companies use LinkedIn to recruit. CMS is included in that number. And about 94% of recruiters use LinkedIn to either vet candidates or search and source for candidates. We'll talk a little bit about searching and sourcing here in a second, but having an up-to-date profile is really going to increase your chances of being found by a company or an agency. And we'll get into that right now. So what I find most helpful, instead of going through slides, because LinkedIn updates so rapidly, I'm just going to share my personal profile. Give me 1 second. And so share. There we go. So I think you can see my screen. Marla, give me a thumbs up. You can see it. Perfect. So my first disclaimer is my profile is not the end all be all. It is, I've completed most of it. And so I just want to give it, show it to you as an example. So one of the big things LinkedIn looks for with your profile is profile completeness. They really want you, to fill everything out, upload images. Ultimately, the more complete your profile is, the better you'll show up in searches. Yeah, that's really it. Just the better you'll show up in searches. So one thing, the 2 easy things you can do here are update your profile photo and then this background or cover photo. So with just updating a profile photo, 14 times more likely to show up in a search. So make sure you have a photo there. I know some people aren't comfortable with uploading a photo. That's fine. Upload a just an image of if you went to college, or you can even just load the default LinkedIn image and just upload that. So that way, at least LinkedIn, it shows LinkedIn that you just check that box of profile completeness, that you have a profile photo. So the next thing we'll talk about is just a quick, you have the ability for just a quick tagline. So just say something a little bit about yourself. I primarily use LinkedIn for recruiting, so I made it recruiting focused. Another thing I'll add here is LinkedIn also gives you the ability in your profile photo. Since I'm a recruiter, I have the option to say that CMS is hiring. But if you are actively looking for positions, there's an option you can select that says, I believe it says open to opportunities. So that'll let employers or recruiters know that you're actively searching. So make sure that all those little things count. Make sure you have your education and your current company or branch updated, and we'll just kind of walk through the profile. So your about section. So for you, this should be, they say your elevator pitch. So just a brief snapshot of who you are, what's your background and what you're looking to do. I've seen it written in first or third person. It's really up to personal preference. Just make sure you have something in there. You also have the ability to add this featured section, so you can really you can add anything you want really that has a URL. So if you were published, if you were involved in a big campaign that had like a news article or something like that, or if you work in IT and you've worked on sites, this is a great place to feature and showcase your experience and your work. Activity, we won't spend too much time. That is just your activity on LinkedIn. And then experience. So I would probably say that the second most important piece of your profile, make sure your experience is filled out. It doesn't need to be an exact replica or mirror your resume. It's really designed to give the recruiter, the employer, just enough information to kind of entice them and want them to reach out to you. But they should have a good example of or should have a good idea of your experience. Because I would say too little would definitely hurt you, because if you just list a job title, that's not really telling an employer or a recruiter much. So make sure you just have, it could be just a 1 or 2 sentence statement in there. It doesn't have to be long, and it doesn't have to be your resume. So go through and add your experience. Another thing you can do with the experience section is you can add media. So by adding media, you can link to a website. I believe you can post a PDF, but you can attach files to kind of highlight your experience. So in 2015, I worked for the FDA, and I worked on a campaign called The Real Cost. So I'm able to link to that there, just see. So if anybody's looking at my profile and wants to know kind of a bit about my background, I have something, almost a portfolio to show them. So again, you can do that with any of the experience blocks. But like I said, make sure it's filled out, and then it's complete, and it gives us recruiters a good idea of what you did in that role. Education, make sure your education's filled out. You can also list any certifications or licenses. So leadership courses you attended while in the military, make sure to include those as well, or any other certificates that you received while serving. And then LinkedIn also has some resources, so you can add certificates that may be related to your position. They have, I would say, probably about 100 different classes. You know, they range from leadership to HR to social media. You can go and take a look at them, complete the courses, and then just add them directly to your LinkedIn profile. Volunteer experience. I know in the military, you know, we are often, we had a lot of volunteer work. So, you know, make sure you include that there as well. And skills is probably the number one, I would say, most important thing for your LinkedIn profile. I wouldn't worry about endorsements too much, but we're gonna just talk briefly about skills, and then we'll wrap up here shortly. But so I say this is the most important thing because this is, other than job title, this is primarily how recruiters across LinkedIn use to search for candidates. So, so the LinkedIn or the recruiter search is primarily a keyword and job title based search. So make sure you have your skills up to date and, you know, put into LinkedIn. So you can, I can't remember the exact number you can add, but it's quite a bit. So make sure, you know, leadership, any, you know, any like hard skills, you know, make sure all that content or those skills and keywords are updated. Like I said, it's really going to pay off because that's how you're going to get pulled into a recruiter search into what's called a talent pool. So, you know, so really, really pay attention to that section. And just wrapping up, recommendations. I wouldn't worry too much about recommendations or giving recommendations. LinkedIn used to rely pretty heavily on that. But I feel like they've kind of gone away from that. So I wouldn't spend too much time. Again, focus on experience and skills. Also, you can add any accomplishments, so any awards you received. I believe you can do a little bit of write-up along with each award, or any major projects. So if you presented it all, you know, things like that, you can add that here. Interest, this is what we talked about, you know, joining groups, things of that nature. Make sure you join those veteran or those active, you know, military groups, because there's a wealth of information and just knowledge, you know, to be gained from that. So really, that's it for me on LinkedIn. I am going to stop sharing for you, Marla. I don't know if do we have any questions?
I think we are good on questions. So we are going to go ahead and wrap up. I know we went a little over today, but we definitely want to thank you for your time today. I am going to launch a quick poll. We are very, very interested in your feedback. That's how we continue to make these presentations better. So if you can just take a quick few seconds and answer our quick 5 questions, that would be amazing while I wrap up. So again, just want to thank all of our volunteers today who came in and shared their story. We definitely thought that brought a lot of value. Sean, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on LinkedIn. I think that is just invaluable information for everybody, but especially veterans. So just a reminder, we will be following up with a email to all registered attendees today, or everybody that's registered for this webinar. So the slide deck will be included in that email, along with our link to our YouTube site where this video, where the video of the webinar will be posted probably the second week in December. And also a reminder, we do have 2 more webinars for this series. So we have our next one, which is CMS Culture Defined. So a very, very interesting webinar. We have 3 panelists, more of a kind of just panel interview style, no slides, just sharing their experience of what their perspective of the CMS culture is. We get that question a lot as recruiters about what the culture is like, what is it like to work at CMS. So we thought it best to just kind of bring people on that work at the agency in all different fields, all different backgrounds, and for them to share their experience. So that should be very interesting. That is on November 17th. So the same link that you registered for this webinar, you can go back and register for that one. And then our final webinar of the year will take place on December 1st, and we will be highlighting 4 of our operational components or hiring departments within CMS to include finance, contracting, and a couple others. I'm sorry, I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but should be very, very informative, especially from the operational standpoint as opposed to our policy work. So with that said, again, just want to thank you for your time today. Thanks for sticking in there with us. Thank you for filling out this form, and we hope you got a lot out of our information today. So thanks again. Hope to see you in the future.